Before we get started, as we start, let's talk about the beginning.
Sure.
Where are you from, and what got you into this whole thing?
No, I appreciate it. Well, I am I guess as much as you can be a local in DC, the DC, Northern Virginia area. I went to high school at Langley High School, just down the way here in McLean. My dad was a foreign service guy, so I kind of came in and out of here over the years, and then to college up in Boston, and then came back here after college. But my first sort of foray into high tech started in the early 90s, so it feels like a long time ago now, with a company actually next door called MicroStrategy. Started by two college friends of mine. I'd been working for big companies for 5 years right out of college, and in the telecom space, and I got a call from a guy named Sanjay Bansal who invited me to dinner one night when he was in town. And we ended up going out, and I complained about being in the big company, and I felt like Dilbert in a cube. I worked for a telecom company, which apparently Scott Adams, the guy who wrote Dilbert, did as well, so I can relate to him on an almost existential level. And he convinced me to come work for a little tiny company at the time called MicroStrategy. It was about 15 people. That business over 9 years went from 15 people to 2,400 people, and then back down to about 1,100, almost actually closer to 900 people, for a lot of reasons, and I won't get into all of them. But what I will say is that the experience was an incredibly adrenaline rush kind of experience. Taking an idea, building a product, building a company, scaling the organization, going public. All of that happened over a period of about 5-6 years in the late 90s and early 2000s. I was not a founder, but I was one of the first sort of employees there, and I kind of got to see everything from a bird's eye perspective. And in 2001, when the business was starting to really have hard time restructuring and sort of figuring out how to survive the downturn that had happened to a lot of tech companies when that bubble burst, MicroStrategy was one of the first. I decided after about 1.5 years of working through that process and learning a lot about how to keep a company going, I decided to do my own thing. And I, in the summer of 2001, got married, did a honeymoon, quit my job, and started a new company. And also later found out, made a baby. So a lot happened in a very short period of time. Thinking, well, one of these things is going to turn out good. And the baby was great. Actually, today's his birthday, 9/11, which is interesting. But so thank you. We also started a company called Clarabridge. And Clarabridge was designed to really build on everything I learned at MicroStrategy as an employee, but this time as CEO. Started the company out of my guest bedroom. I had two co-founders. We basically corresponded every day over instant messenger from AOL, AIM, if you guys remember that. And basically just pounded the pavement, trying to find companies who wanted our help building big data warehouses and analytical applications. Over a period of about 6-7 years, we built that company up to about 150 people, built projects and solutions for a variety of commercial and government clients, like a lot of companies in the DC area learned how to do. But we focused more on the commercial side just because that's what we had learned how to do in our prior lives. And we ended up working with big banks, big retailers, big cosmetics and consumer goods companies, as well as some of the big agencies in town. And when we got to a year where we could kind of take a breath and look at what we were doing, we said, we really should take some of this money and build something, not just continue to do consulting work. And I'm sure a lot of companies, a lot of entrepreneurs in the room have had that sort of insight, particularly if you start in the government services business. You say, I should turn this money into something I can sell repeatably. Because when you get to 100, 200 people as a consulting business, you realize you're not going to continue to scale as easily. It takes double the people to make double the money, and it gets a lot harder, and people are hard to manage when they get to be that big in an organization. And if you can take an idea and really make it repeatable, you can really change the world in a much more scalable way. So we basically started a company called Clarabridge, and that business was sort of conceived in 2004, really invested in from a time and money perspective in 2005 as a skunk works inside Clarabridge. And it basically started out as a product that could take unstructured data. So think about documents and conversations and transcripts and SEC filings, anything, medical records, anything that's unstructured. Take unstructured data and run it through a transformation process and turn it into quantitative, tagged, scored data that you could then analyze like you look at data in a spreadsheet. And we were techie because we'd kind of grown up in data analytics and big data stuff, and we weren't really that good at marketing. So we came up with this really sexy name. It was called Clarabridge unstructured ETL, which stands for extract, transform, and load. And we shortcutted it because we thought it would be cool to give it an acronym. We called it Clarabridge UETL. And suffice it to say, that didn't roll off the tongue. So we learned early on the lessons of marketing that we should probably think about a name that's a little bit more sort of compelling than UETL. So we changed the name. It became Clarabridge Enterprise, which is a little bit better. And over a period of about a year or two, we tested it and tried to figure out who would buy it, why would it work. So we basically, like a lot of entrepreneurs, the challenge was figuring out how do you make money, right? We thought we had a good idea. The investment thesis was a sort of a big, grand idea, which is that companies in the 90s and into the early 2000s had spent billions of dollars trying to tame the data beast. But the data beast was structured data. It was financial data and sales data and ERP data. And companies like MicroStrategy made a lot of money helping companies tame that beast in the 90s and early 2000s. Our view was in the 2000s and beyond, people were going to spend a lot of time and money taming the unstructured data beast, which was all of the stuff that you couldn't put into a spreadsheet and make sense of. So we tried selling it to the lawyers. And if there are any lawyers in the room, I apologize for what I'm going to say next. And what we found was that the lawyers, their businesses are based on basically something called time and materials. So the more work you give them, the more they charge. And what we were offering them was a way to actually do a whole lot more work for a lot less billability, right? And so it didn't really fly at the time. We went to the healthcare guys and we said, we can really tame this sort of medical records beast. And back then, HIPAA and all of the privacy issues were even more kind of lightning rod issues than they are now. So nobody was really willing to combine data and use it to kind of look for trends, at least not in a kind of a public vendor, company-oriented kind of way. We went to some of the three-letter agencies around town, and we spent a bunch of time pounding the pavement with them. And we got some interesting conversations and a few pilot projects, which I probably can't talk about. But we also learned that those projects are very long, sales cycles are very long, and you have to navigate very big systems integration companies, which we had done fairly effortlessly as Clariview, but with Clarabridge it was harder because the product was still very new, and we wanted to build a product once and sell it 1 million times. And what you find in the government, particularly when you're a startup entrepreneur, is that agencies like to take hold of that startup technology and customize the hell out of it. And if you're not careful, you get sucked into such a custom solution that you can't sell it to anybody else without rebuilding it over and over again. And then you're just a consulting company. And we didn't want that to be. We explicitly wanted to be a product company. So we made a conscious decision to walk away from that business, even though there was some lucrative opportunity there. It just was not going to be scalable to the business model that we wanted. And then the final business that we really thought might be sort of the last gasp, if you will, was let's go try to figure out if people want to use this to do market research and to do customer analysis. So we went to a few banks and a few retailers, and we said, how do you do market research? And we quickly learned that companies like hotels, like Choice Hotels, or software companies like Intuit, spend millions of dollars to take all of their customer feedback, and they run these big survey programs with market research agencies like Meritz and TNS and other big billion-dollar companies. And for that expense, they get quarterly, at least back then, this was in the mid-2000s now, 2005, 6 timeframe, they get quarterly executive reports, PowerPoints, which by the time the data's in that PowerPoint, it's usually 2 to 3 months old. If there's been a crisis, it's a post-mortem. If there's a trending issue, it's not even in there. And we said, if we can take all that data, funnel it through the Clarabridge product, we can give you situational real-time awareness on when your customers are having issues, when they're complaining about a product issue, when a campaign's going backwards, when there's a customer support issue, because we're seeing it. It's basically coming into your screen, just like numbers falling on the matrix, that logo, and only more intuitive to look at. And so we basically convinced ourselves that that was the market we should be focused on. And very quickly, when we made that decision, stuff started to happen. We started to get business from marketing organizations, customer care organizations, and any organization that was trying to understand what are they doing to make their customers happy and loyal, and what are they doing that pisses them off.
So I wanted to interrupt you. So how long did it take from your sort of conceiving the Clarabridge product idea until you got this great traction?
It took almost 2 years, right? So the idea came to us for Clarabridge in really late 04, early 05. We didn't really kind of focus on a specific business solution until late 06.
So what in your gut told you that this thing is sellable? There's a customer that will pay money for this. Because it sounds like you were a bunch of smart guys. You were a services business.
Yep.
Had some nice cash flow, right?
Yep.
And you had this great idea, but how did you? It took you 2 years to actually.
It's 2 years. I mean, it was one of our investors. We ended up taking VC right around that time, and one of our investors, a guy named Andy Jones, at the time he was at Boulder Ventures. He said to me, he said, "We had no idea if what you were doing was going to work. You just were a bunch of smart guys. You'd started a company that you'd made money with before, and we figured we'd give you enough money to throw spaghetti against the wall until you figured out what stuck, right?" So if you, by the way, if you're trying to get a VC, get one that has that mentality, at least in the early stage. It's good. Andy's no longer in VC right now. Now he helps companies expand internationally. So if you need that, you should go to him too. But what ultimately happened, and I look back, in hindsight, I say there was a perfect storm that in hindsight made this a great market for us. One is there were three factors. One is there was incredibly rich and increasingly growing amounts of data on customer feedback. Because if you think back again to the mid-2000s, companies had completed the transformation from asking you for feedback by putting an index card on your table, right? Or having conversations in CRM systems that were in big proprietary mainframe platforms. They were moving all to open systems like Salesforce or Siebel Analytics, or they were using survey platforms that were on the internet. So the content was readily available and it was big, and nobody was doing anything with it. The second was we had a really clear ROI, right, a return on investment. I could go to any company and say, I bet if you use Clarabridge, you will pay for this software in 6 to 9 months. Because you're either paying too much for market research, for manual reading and coding, or you're doing nothing, and basically you're losing market share to people who are doing it better than you. So you have to spend the money, and rather spend $250,000 to $500,000 on us for the software versus $1 million to $2 million for a market research firm. And then the third, which was sort of the icing on the cake, was at the end of 2006, early 2007, this cab driver in San Francisco started a company called Twitter. And companies started thinking that maybe they ought to be using Twitter to connect to customers. And there was this huge wave of chatter that was just sort of exploding. And people were scared about it in 2007 in particular, and started to try to do pilots with social media. And at that point we said, if we can piggyback on that trend too, we've got a really good company.
So talk about that, because you were one of the leaders in business intelligence and sentiment sort of analytics for social media, right?
Yes.
So how did you crack into that space, and how's that business going right now?
It's going pretty well. I think if you look at who's a Clarabridge customer today, they tend to be big companies with lots of customers, lots of locations, and generally a competitive market where they know that if they do something badly for long enough, they're going to lose market share to a competitor because customers will defect. And so that really means big retail like a Best Buy or a Walmart or an Amazon, big banking like a B of A or a PNC or a Wells Fargo, big consumer goods, folks like Dell, Toshiba, Acer, General Mills, Coca-Cola, that kind of business. Or big telco, companies like Verizon, T-Mobile, Vodafone in the UK. And they are generally buying Clarabridge because they don't want to miss out on what a customer is saying. So we have not decided to position the company as just a social company. Social is an incredibly important part for all of those businesses because they have huge and growing social presence, and they also have a desire to monitor what people are saying about them. But the real value for Clarabridge beyond just the social is we can take the social and the call centers and the emails and the notes and the chats and the surveys and all the information and provide a single view. And in a way, our best customer is a customer that's been trying to keep up with just the Twitter or the Facebook on their own and trying to do the same thing with call centers and trying to make sense of survey research and saying there's got to be a better way. And Clarabridge positions itself as the better way, the way to bring all the data together, to get the single view, if you will.
Are you offering the social product to SMBs, or are you still enterprise?
We have sort of dabbled in the SMB market. I will say right now the majority of our business is Fortune 2000 or Global 2000. We do have an offering that is accessible from a price point for the SMB, but it's not probably the main driver of growth right now.
Right.
Yeah.
So you mentioned call centers.
Yep.
You know, Jeff Yentis, one of our stars from CyberUp, is here, and he started a new business to do call center analytics for his customer care customers, large telcos primarily, who have a lot of customer service problems. What are you guys doing in that space, and how are you able to capture because there's millions of phone calls, tens of millions of minutes. How do you gather all that?
Yeah, so the call center area has been an area of increasing interest in us because while there's a lot of companies that do social, right, and there's probably some folks here starting social businesses, I wouldn't be surprised. In the call center space, that business has long been dominated by very large hardware and software companies. Companies like NICE and Nuance and Verint, they're all billion-dollar companies, and Genesys, who've built hardware, software, service solutions for agent management, scheduling management, making sure that you get in on and off calls and handle cases well. And we're not trying to compete with that at all. But what a lot of those companies don't do very well is make sense of the actual conversational content, right? In most organizations, up until 5 or 6 years ago, really when Clarabridge started to break out, when people talked about performance management, they talked about the structured pieces of a transaction, right? In retail, it's how much did you buy? What was in your market basket? What do I know about you and your CRM score and your loyalty? And in call centers, it was how long were you on hold? How long did it take to solve your issue? Maybe you had a survey score if you filled it out after your call, and was it a 1 to 5, right, score? That was it. But if you want to use call center data to figure out why do people call, what are the real training issues, what are the things your agents don't know, what are the things that your customers are asking you about products because your products are confusing or they're poorly labeled or they have been mismarketed, or what are the competitive insights? If someone's really angry at you and they say, look, I've been using brand X for years and I just traded to you and here's what I hate about your product. There's all that data in the call center conversations. So we take 3 things from the call centers. We take notes. Agents are typing away when they're talking to you. We get all those notes. We take the surveys. After you've had a call, a good number of you will be said, please answer a few short questions after the call. And we'll take that information as well, which is either recorded, I love this, hate this, or it's multiple choice questions with your keypad. And then most recently, we just announced something called Clarabridge Voice, which actually takes the recordings. And that's a new offering that we just announced about a week ago. We've been piloting in for some of our big clients in the banking and consumer goods space, but we've decided to make it generally available. And so if somebody is just recording calls, your call may be recorded for quality purposes. Now it's not just training quality, it's actually getting understanding of the customer experience.
So I read about that in the Business Journal,
Yep.
So that was the article?
Yeah.
So you're using voice recognition technology
That's right.
to put it into text?
Yeah, we have a technology partner, company based out of Pittsburgh that has done some really rocket science stuff. DoD funded research in the early days, and then they commercialized it about 3-4 years ago. And it's super high quality. And one of the things it's really good at, which has been a challenge in the past with voice analytics, is that, or speech analytics, is that to get every single conversation recorded in real time and transcribed in real time and analyzed in real time was an extremely costly endeavor. And these guys have created some really, really cool acceleration technology for being able to do that. And they did it for reasons that you can probably imagine in the government space, but it has a really good commercial utility now as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
What do you guys see for the company in the space? Are you looking at foreign language type solutions? Or where's this thing going?
Yeah, so there's a few sort of avenues for investment and growth right now. One, probably the most sort of, I guess, expected, but hardest as well, is just general sales growth and coverage growth. So we are based here in Northern Virginia, just down on the Silver Line, yeah, which is nice. Helps our employees get out there in Reston. But we have offices in San Francisco, Boston, Chicago, London, and we are expanding the company pretty dramatically. The sales organization has grown 100% in the last basically 18 months. And we're going to look to continue to double down on just sales coverage to kind of grow the account base around North America and also in Europe. Asia Pacific is probably an area we'll be focusing on next year. We do have multiple language support today. Today we support about 14 languages, so we can deploy anywhere in sort of Western Europe, North and South America, and we do have Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Arabic, Turkish, and Russian. So we can kind of support a pretty broad community right now. From a technology perspective, the trends make the product more big data, more scalable, because we're in a business where every year the data is growing geometrically. but also make it more useful for more users. So the typical buyer is not buying us because we're this big back-end database running in the cloud with all this conversations. They buy us because we deliver alerts, we deliver insights through reporting, and we deliver data flows into downstream systems. And so the key is making sure that what our customers want so they can consume customer insights, we package and deliver, and we do it in an easy-to-use way. Our typical Clarabridge customer is not a data guy or an IT guy. He's typically, or she is typically a marketing person or a customer insights person or a customer operations executive who's trying to understand what's going on in their business. So they're not looking for super technically complex products. They're looking for something that gives them insights that they can consume quickly and act on readily. So a lot of R&D there. And then the third area is, and this gets to some of the corp dev discussions that we've had internally. We raised a bunch of money, and I'm happy to talk a bit more about that last fall. We're in a market that I think is starting to achieve some escape velocity, right? In the sense of we're getting big enough, we've got good customers, and customers are depending on vendors like us to do more for them and create more value. So part of this is, are there interesting acquisitions that we might look at to kind of bulk up the company and provide a more complete offering for our customers? So the last area is corp dev investments.
Right. So when you started Clarabridge,
yeah,
was it self-funded or did you have?
It was, yeah. I put some money in. Actually, a little interesting story there. I kind of glossed over that, but I put enough money to buy the three of us who started the company PCs and DSL in our homes, so we could AOL instant message each other, and to travel around to find a few deals. And we were trying to basically build products even with Clarabridge in the early days, and we built some basic concepts for data fusion solutions for the government and a bunch of other things. None of it stuck. And when we realized that we were going to run out of money, I basically called a bunch of old MicroStrategy customers. My sort of non-compete had expired at that point. And I just said, hey, do you need any BI consulting, business intelligence consulting? And what got me into the Clarabridge business, and us as a company in the Clarabridge business, was the fact that we were running out of money. So you kind of fall back to, hey, I need to make money. I don't want this thing to die, so let me just do what I know how to do. Forget my big high-minded dreams. We got to pay the bills. Yeah, but that worked, and that got us off the ground. So.
And for 2 years, you were doing consulting?
Yeah, for the first year was sort of spending the initial investment. The second year was, okay, we're running out of money. Let's just do consulting to help companies build data warehouses and business solutions for business intelligence. And we did that for 2 to 3 years and got really, really good at it. I think the other interesting finding is we started that company, again, in September of 2011, right after basically the world ended for a lot of reasons, economically, politically. And people would often ask, why would you start a business at sort of that trough? There's a lot of good reasons to start a business in a trough. One is that talent is available because a lot of companies were laying off. The second is just because companies are downsizing doesn't mean there's not demand for the services and products you offer. And in fact, my experience at MicroStrategy and a lot of companies I saw in this area is they overcut because they were so eager to get back to profitability. They cut harder and deeper than they needed to be viable because they wanted to quickly survive. And by doing so, they starved their customers with the talent to get things done. So a lot of companies started looking for smaller boutique firms to sort of meet the need that the big guys couldn't provide anymore. And then the last thing was a lot of things were cheap. Real estate was cheap. My first, real estate for Clarabridge, I paid $10 per square foot because I was basically getting it on a fire sale from a company that had downsized, 80% of their space, and they were just trying to cover their costs. They'd already written off the entire lease. So that's a good way to start a company. I'm not suggesting and hope that doesn't happen again, but it wasn't bad in the long run.
So when you developed the product, how did you fund that?
So we at the time,
first product.
The Clarabridge product? Yeah, so this was, again, 2000.
To morph from being a services business.
Right. So at the end of 2004, Clarabridge, the consulting business, was about a probably $8 million company. And it was a consulting business. And we had kind of cracked the code on building a good cash flow business. So we banked a bunch of that. A good chunk of that money was actually profit. And when you run a cash flow positive business, you have two options with the money at the end of the year. You can pay it to the partners, or you can put it back in the company. And the first couple of years, we paid it out to the partners. And we bought houses and boats and second homes and things like that, and set aside college funds for the kids. That year, though, we decided to pour all of the profit back into Clarabridge and said, we're going to spend about $1 million at least to get Clarabridge as a product from idea to product. And that happened over the course of basically 2005. And we got to the end of 2005, and we had
quick interjection. Given everything that's happened in the last 10, 12 years, how much would it have cost you today?
Probably would have been about, I'd say double by now at least, because just between the labor costs and everything else. Okay. I'd say, I don't think it would be more than that.
So the big bulk of your cost was in the labor?
Yeah, it was mostly hiring up and ramping up the engineering talent. Even then we did do stuff on site, but there were companies that we could host, host our applications on. So we went out to hosting companies, same thing you do today. But it took about $1 million in that money, probably about $2 million now. But at the end of 2005, we saw that it was going to probably take at least another $1 million to get the product to get to be minimum viable, right? Something you could actually sell. We could do pilots and prototypes and get customers interested in it, but we hadn't cracked the code on this customer analytics space, and we hadn't really got the product to be something you could just provision like you would with a SaaS product. So we said, all right, so let's say, do we want to put another $2 million in? And at that point, you get to a kind of an existential question. Clarabridge at that point was running about 12, 13 million in revenues. It was a high functioning consulting company with good, reasonable sized contracts with government agencies and very profitable contracts with commercial companies. And at MicroStrategy, going back to my first big tech experience, Michael Saylor had decided to take MicroStrategy. What a lot of people don't know is it started out as a consulting company, and he turned it into a product company. And I'd seen that transition happen way back at MicroStrategy. And so I knew it was hard. And you lose people, you have to kind of kill the culture that creates high billability and margins and services to do so. And it's high risk, it doesn't always succeed. He made it work. But he also had a much smaller consulting company than we had with Clarabridge at that time. So we made the decision not to turn Clarabridge into Clarabridge, but to actually split the company into two. And so we hired a lawyer. We basically created a separate corporate entity. We spun it out. We issued separate stock for the Clarabridge company. And we went out into the market and said, we're going to look for investments in Clarabridge, not Clarabridge. Don't touch Clarabridge. It's fine. It's making money. It doesn't need investment. And that decision, in the hindsight, turned out to be a very good one, because by doing so, the folks that really had a passion for running a high-performance consulting business could keep doing it. And we could basically get all scrappy and startup-y with Clarabridge and go out and raise money and not dilute the brand or the culture or the sort of the working methods of the two companies with each other.
So how was the financing journey? Was it a long road?
It's been, yes. Once you embark on that journey, it is a long road. And I say that with a little bit of humor as well. But when we started looking for money, the first round, I think in hindsight, was actually a lot easier than I expected. And part of it was the Clarabridge business had kind of established a reputation for us as entrepreneurs. And we had been rebuffing a lot of the overtures from folks to give us money for Clarabridge because we didn't need it. But when we decided to split Clarabridge and Clarabridge, we dusted off all the business cards and said, okay, now we're going to call these guys and say, we do have something to invest in. It's Clarabridge. And if you're interested, let's talk about that. And we got interest from the Mid-Atlantic community because they knew us. I did go up to Boston, and I did take a trip out to the Bay Area, but I wasn't known. We as a company weren't known. And the idea wasn't formed enough that I think it would have sold on its own merits. But we were able to get term sheets within about 2-3 months and close the A round pretty quickly. The B round was also not too bad. That was about a year later, and then we did a C round.
How big was the A round?
A round was $3 million. Okay. So at that point, we put $4 million in the company, $1 million of our own and $3 million from the A round. And then we did a B round a year later, which was $7.5 million. And then we did a C round about a year and a half after that, which was 12. And then we did a follow-on, and that was actually, the C round was done in August of 2008. which if you remember 2008, and actually that was the election year, that was when Lehman Brothers crashed, that was when AIG went out of business. So I was haggling with my new investors over some terms, and we were haggling all through July and into August. Control provisions, preferences, dividends. If you've ever raised money, you know what I'm talking about. I was adamant that I wanted to get a couple of those terms from our A round eased in the C round. And we finally hit sort of a middle ground after about 6-7 weeks of negotiation. Some of it a little bit confrontational. And the week after we inked the deal, basically Wall Street melted. And I think to myself, I'm so damn lucky, because if I had argued for a week later, I could have lost all the money. And we were down to our last $100,000 in the bank.
Oh, wow.
And we were spending, about $300,000 a month.
Oh, wow.
So I would not recommend negotiating like I did in that particular case if you have that situation again. Yeah.
That's fine. We had Rick Rudman here a few months ago, and he said he had no cash when he did his first round. And he was playing poker and just got lucky, too.
Yeah.
Luck is important.
Luck does matter.
Timing.
Luck is knowing where to be in the right place in the right time. It's not completely luck, I think, but you pick your luck as a little bit. And I think, but knowing, we got a little bit lucky there, that's for sure. And then, beyond that, the most recent financing. So the last major financing was in 2008, and we did a little bit of a top-off in 2010, which we actually didn't end up using. The company has, from 2010-11, been operating on average almost break even on a cash flow basis. We've lost a little bit of money, but it's generally been less than 5–10% of our bookings every year. So the business is viable now from a financial perspective. But
what percent of your revenue is recurring, SaaS?
It's about 85% right now. So it's a very much recurring revenue. The other transition we went through, and again, companies that got started in really the middle of the last decade, a lot of them, and certainly Clarabridge was no exception, weren't 100% committed to the recurring revenue model when we started. I was concerned that companies wouldn't entrust all of their customer data to a third party to host. And so we made a decision to offer Clarabridge on-premise as well as on a recurring SaaS basis, software as a service basis. But what we found was in the first year or two that because we were selling to marketing people and customer care people and operations people, they often would go to IT and say, hey, can you install this Clarabridge in the data center? And the IT guys would be like, no time, no money, no interest, go away. Because it was also a new technology, and people weren't really aware of what text and sentiment analytics was and how to configure it and how to make it work. So we finally, out of just necessity, said, screw it, we'll host. Would you be okay if we just host it for you and you can just run it through us? And our buyers, the other thing that was interesting is when you're selling to marketing buyers and ops buyers, their business, it's punctuated by these huge capital investments in hardware and software and call center. But most of their spend is recurring spend. It's the networking, it's market research, consulting agencies, it's other things. So the bulk of their budgets are set up to buy things on an annual contract. And so it actually made it easier when we started offering Clarabridge as a recurring service or hosted service offering to get that money. So again, you don't always go into business knowing these things when you're trying to sell a product, but very quickly we realized that's the way to really drive this business.
So you were saying about your most recent round, how much did you raise and who were your investors and what are you doing with all that money?
This new raise is different than the other rounds because it was a lot bigger amount of money. We raised $80 million. It's different also because we brought in out-of-market investors, some guys out of Boston. And probably most different, it's different because we didn't take the money to fund operations. We took the money to basically take the company to the next level. So of that $80 million, some of the money was used to accelerate a little bit of spend at the beginning of this year because the round closed in October of last year. So we spent 2 or 3 months saying, okay, what are we going to do with all this money? The second part of it was providing liquidity for early investors. So we did have a meaningful amount of that raise was used for secondary. People like, where's Bob Nelson in the back there? Thank you for your support. We were able to pay him back a little bit. Other folks that sort of invested as angels in the business way back. And so we did that. And then the third piece of it was to put a little bit of money on the balance sheet for M&A, both to basically securitize debt if we need it and to use it to actually finance acquisitions. And so starting at the end of last year, we did a market search of various kinds of technology and solution areas that might be complementary to what we do for our customers, and made a decision to buy a West Coast company based in Marin County called CONNECTpreneur that basically does feedback and social analytics, and we've now kind of bolted on their product to our product, and it now provides a greater capability to our current and new customers and allows us to grow faster too.
All right. Now, can you comment about possibly going public or doing some kind of a bigger deal?
Yeah, I mean, within reason.
It's the next step in the progression.
I'm not a
right?
public company, so I don't think I'm fully beholden to all those, what are they, safe harbor provisions. But no, generally speaking, and just notionally speaking, I think if you're in a business today, the things that are good sort of criteria to meet if you're thinking about an IPO are, you need to have highly predictable revenue so you can give consistent and accurate guidance. You have to have good growth, and the growth rates that we've always been striving to hit are 30 to 50% a year, which is pretty
top line.
Top line growth, yeah, top line bookings growth, which translates to revenue growth as well. You don't have to be profitable, but you have to be able to show very easily that the business could become profitable, on a moment's notice with a few minor tweaks. And I think we've gotten to that point too. We have the growth rate, we have the ability to show the inflection point to GAAP profitability. We've already shown that we can be cash flow positive and accretive. And then the final thing is you need to be of a certain size and scale. And I think that the size and scale bar, back in the late 90s, in the peak of the bubble, I remember getting to know the CEO of a company called LivePerson up in New York. He IPO'd when they were $2 million in revenue, right? You can't do that today. Today, the metric is probably 50 on the low end. When you get to 70 to 100 million in revenue, that's a good sweet spot for an IPO. And we're in the range, but we want to be on the higher end of that range right now. So I think that says, let's see what happens over the next 12 to 24 months.
But are you loving it every day, or?
I'm loving it. I mean, I'm not saying I don't have, my hair on fire every few months, but and I have. But yeah, I am. This is, I think, and I've got two boys now. They're 10 and 12. And it's like raising a kid in a way, not that I'm saying my employees are kids, I'm saying companies are like kids, right. Is that every stage of the company is a new adventure, right? Just like every stage of being a father is a new adventure. This is a new adventure for me that is it's got echoes of familiarity from having observed it as a member of the management team at MicroStrategy, but it's completely different as the guy doing it, right? And you really do build the company in your image, right, and your vision, and you're sometimes right and you're sometimes wrong, and you have to constantly adapt. And I keep learning every day, and I keep having fun. So yeah, I'm in it. It's good.
That's great.
Yeah.
We want to open it up for some questions momentarily, but we have a lot of startup entrepreneurs in the room that are looking for their first customer, they're building their first product, or they are looking for angel money or maybe a Series A. Just in general, you've done quite a bit despite your young age, and you're going to be doing more, and we're really happy to have you here. It's great to have you're like a poster child, I think, for the next generation, And
yeah.
But anyway, what kind of advice would you give to the entrepreneurs in the room that are slugging it out?
I'll give you a few little pithy sort of words of advice, but I think they're all based on real hard experiences and sort of learnings along the way. The first is, and probably you could conclude this from a lot of the comments, is that don't be afraid to change, because your idea is never right the first time. I mean, I think as a general rule of thumb, any startup idea you have is probably wrong. That doesn't mean it's wrong and you'll fail. It means you just have to, it's a constant iterative evolution and adaptation to what works, right? That was true with Clarabridge, that was true with Clarabridge. Frankly, it was true with MicroStrategy even way back when I was there. And being able to listen to yourself, listen to your employees, listen to your customers, or to the people that don't buy your stuff is going to be terribly instructive. And that journey of getting to what works, I think, you're hard-pressed to get to the right sort of configuration in less than 2 years. It's usually at least a year to 2 years. And it's probably true of your experience as well. The second big education, which I haven't really touched on so much, is that the people and the tone that you set as a CEO are so critical. The darkest times I've been through, and I've been through some dark times over the years, have been ones when my own attitude contributed to the darkness, right? when you're down on yourself, when you're down on the business, it brings other people down. People want to follow people that have it together. Or if they don't have it together, say, I don't have it together, I need your help. Right? But you can't carry it all in yourself. You have to basically work with other people. And I think that there were some times, when we decided to raise that $80 million last year, part of it was because we wanted to go big and go forward and go bold. But part of it was we had gone through a period where my first round of investors who'd been with me, and been with the company almost 8 years, were tired, right? And they were starting to provide conflicting advice about what to do, and board dynamics started to get squirrely. We couldn't make big decisions because everyone was sort of gravitating to their own agenda and goal for what they wanted out of their investments. And it's like what's happening in government today. When people have different agendas and they have no interest in reaching compromise, you can't get shit done, right? And so we realized the only way to make this company great was to basically get rid of the gridlock at the board level. Even though the board is very detached from the employees and the customers, big decisions get made there. Budgeting decisions, investment decisions, corp dev decisions. And if you can't make decisions, if everything's a kick the can down the road, you won't build a great company. So the idea was bring in new investors that can actually put fresh blood on the board and get everyone aligned to, okay, how do we take this company that's good and make it great? Let's not worry about how do we get what we want out of it right now. And that was a tough process, I'll say. And I think in the end, we pulled a hat trick. We really did work hard to get everybody what they wanted. Get the old people the money they needed to feel comfortable giving the reins to the new people, and give the new people sufficient sort of visibility and control to the good, the bad, and the great that could be possible so that they were willing to step up. And then the third piece of it, which is tied to the second piece, I think is never, 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 never act in fear. And that's sort of maybe a more high-level concept, but I feel like whenever I was scared about anything, I forced myself to shut down, because I have never seen anyone make a good decision when they're scared. I would go home and I would sleep on it, and I would say, I'm going to wake up with a fresh perspective when my emotions are lower and I've been restored, and I can try to make a better decision. And that can be on anything: hiring someone, firing somebody that's important, making a big investment decision, right? Deciding how to handle a really challenging customer situation. I think emotions, it's important to be connected to your emotions, but it's also important to know when your emotions are getting the best of you. And that, again, that's not really entrepreneurial advice. I think that's just probably good human advice, but it applies to being an entrepreneur too.
Yeah, so, that's great advice.
Yeah.
We have time for some questions. Would anybody have some questions? Yes.
But yeah, your story is very inspiring. I have one question. Like when you decided to divide your company into two parts, one for consulting and the other as a product-based company, like you lose focus in some cases. There is also brand dilution. Your positioning changes. How did you manage that?
Sure. No, it's a great question. The question
go ahead.
Yeah, just for the folks on the other side of the room. His question was, when you divide a company, into two different businesses, the challenge is you might lose brand awareness, perception, and kind of dilute the focus of what you do and how do you manage it. So we decided to keep the first part of the name. Clarabridge is Clara and Clarabridge is Clara. And when we did that, I did get a lot of questions like, who the heck is Clara, right? And I had to make up interesting stories like, oh, it was the woman that dumped me at prom or other things. But there was no Clara. Clara's just meant clarity, because her idea was trying to create clarity out of all this noise and data that's out there. I think that the first year, most people did lump Clarabridge into Clarabridge. They thought it was just part of the consulting business. I honestly, I don't have a good answer for you. The only way to really escape the branding is to make the product successful enough that it actually starts to get known by its product name. And it did take about a year or two before I didn't have people continuing to confuse it. I suppose in hindsight, I could have come out with a more different name that was not as confusing. And again, that's me not being the marketing genius. I probably want to be sometimes, but it just took time. The other thing, from a leadership perspective, there was a challenge when we started to really run the two companies. I fancied myself being able to do both very well. And it became clear after about a year that I couldn't do both well. So I brought in someone from the outside, a very senior sort of guy, one of the founding members of a consulting company in the area called AMS at the time, a guy named Larry Seidel. He had been retired from AMS after they had sold the business to CGI and was sort of helping other companies in the area as sort of an advisor. And I convinced him to come in and help me run Clarabridge, the consulting business, for about a year. And honestly, he was invaluable because he really put this sort of, how do we create a very disciplined service business, while I was frankly not focused on it because I was getting more involved with the Clarabridge business. And we ended up selling Clarabridge in '08 to a company called Teradata, which is a big data platform company. And we couldn't have done that without Larry just kind of staying focused on operationally running the Clarabridge business.
Did you intend to sell Clarabridge as a means to finance Clarabridge? It was, when you did the split, or did you want to keep it?
Well, we didn't so much want it to finance Clarabridge. We wanted it to basically, we believed that if we kept it running as a viable, high-performing business, it could sell. And the way that we structured it was Clarabridge was owned by the founders. There were 3 of us originally, and then it sort of expanded to a 4th guy who was running and a partner in the business. And Clarabridge was VC funded, so it had a much more complicated cap table because it had outside investors and angels and so on. And so the idea was we'd want to build Clarabridge up to a point and then maybe sell it, and then that money would come back to the original founders. So we'd have a liquidity event. But the timing, again, this is just luck, I suppose. But we thought about it, and then literally 3 months after we split the 2 companies, actually it's probably 6 months, I got a call, inbound call from Teradata, the summer of 2006. And we didn't really engage, but about a year later they came back in 2007, and we actually started a process with them, and that led to the sale in 2008 of Clarabridge. So it worked out. I mean, and again, it's not necessarily a process that was guaranteed to work, right? We could have gotten defocused, we could have had branding issues, we could have had people in Clarabridge feeling like they weren't getting enough attention to grow the business, they could have left. All kind of things could have gone wrong, but we managed to run it well. And I think, again, I credit a lot of that to Larry, just coming in and really helping to drive a solid sort of culture, while a bunch of us founders of Clarabridge were kind of distracted by Clarabridge.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Neil Wasserman, CONNECTpreneur Analytics. I was wondering if you had been able to apply data analytics to the kind of conversations that you're addressing in a way that identifies the emotional content, the meta connection between both parties, and I'm thinking of applications in healthcare, say between healthcare communications that requires a kind of trust relationship with the patient.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is we can get partially there. We do use a lot of linguistic rules, and we look for certain words and uses of words in certain use cases that suggest emotional state. And we actually, one of the things that we've done in the way that the product interprets language is you can think of it in 3 dimensions. We run all the data through a combination of basically semantic parsing, which is basically tech speak for saying we diagram sentences like you learned how to do in middle school, right? So we know some sentences are connected subjects and verbs and objects and adjectives and how they're all linked. The second thing we do is we take those entities and we look at how the words are related to each other to form concepts. And those concepts can be dry concepts like a particular product issue or service issue, or they can be emotional concepts if one of the words is a subjective word. We know that certain words have subjective intonation. And then those words can be amplified or negated based on how they're modified. So there's all kinds of linguistic rules that determine, like if I say, I love this coffee versus I like this coffee versus I hate this coffee versus I would have loved this coffee except it was too cold. All of those things start to imply and connote a different level of intensity of emotion. And we can do that with love, hate, rage, anger, frustration, confusion, based on the kind of words people use. In terms of the two-way interaction, there you can start to look at the sort of the delta between the 2 parties. So when you start to see one person is going one way and the other person is not moving, you can see there's a disconnect. But most of what we do today is really trying to capture the customer's voice. For us, it almost doesn't matter what the agent is doing. If it's a person on the phone, we really want to know what's the customer, and then go back and say, if it's an individual person or an individual group of people, let's figure out what's wrong at the root cause level. The other thing is a lot of the data we collect is not two-way, right? Social media data is largely people just posting to the world. Survey data is the same. So a good chunk of our conversations are two-way, but an even larger chunk are not. They're basically just one-way inbound communication or outbound communication if it's on social media. And there's also, the other technique is something called machine learning, and we do use machine learning to basically look for patterns and things that you can't find deterministically. So there's a lot of technology under the covers to make all this stuff work, and it's constantly being tweaked and tuned to make it better.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Sure, go ahead.
Who's your speech software provider in Pittsburgh?
They're called Voci Tech, V-O-C-I, yeah, and the website is vocitech.com. Yep. Yeah.
What roles do partners have in your go-to-market strategy? You talked about sales expansion, and is your value prop still such that you need to do it all yourself, or you can have partners take on your recipe and deliver?
So the partner strategy has been something that we've been also looking to constantly optimize over the years. The first couple of years, and by first couple of years I'm talking about sort of 2010 to 12, when we started really growing, we decided that it might be cool to embed Clarabridge inside, right, like you do with Intel inside. So we were licensing the technology to companies like LivePerson, which is a chat company, and Verint, which is a call center software and hardware company. But what we found was that those licensing models benefited the OEM provider more than us, because our real value is getting our customers to use Clarabridge, and over time to add more data to the system and to use it in more departments and more business units. And we lost control of that. And a lot of times the OEMs are focused on a very narrow sort of part of the business, either just the call center or just social or just something. So we've refocused in the last really 24 months much more on a services partnerships, reseller partnerships, and referral partnerships. And we're working with companies like Cognizant, right, has brought us into companies like Fifth Third Bank, and we work together at Coca-Cola. And Accenture has been a great partner at places like USAA and Best Buy and Verizon. And we're working with market research companies that are now finally realizing that technology is changing the way people think about customer research, and they're embracing companies like us as opposed to trying to compete with us. So the goal is get those companies to want to either use us or recommend us or implement us, and then have our direct sales organization work with those companies as true partners. We're still going to take most of the transactions on our paper, but we're happy to make it very valuable and win-win for partners to work with us through different kinds of financial arrangements. Yeah, in the back there.
You mentioned the word luck. In your opinion, how important is luck in starting a company?
How important is luck in starting a company? So
I think that luck is nice when you get it, but I do think that for every good luck event I've had some really terrible bad luck events too. And I think when you have the bad luck events, recovering from the bad luck, which is just good, hard determination and work, is equally important. I think the luck is gravy, right? And I think being able to pick on luck is good. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that, fate deals your hand certain things that make it more likely that you'll be successful or not. But luck is never enough, right? You can never succeed solely on luck. When you get it, use it. But if you don't get it, you can still be successful, right? I mean, I think back, I'll give you a good example of, call it luck, call it fate. My first sort of venture into the startup world was with the two guys that started MicroStrategy, Sanju Bansal and Michael Saylor. They were my fraternity brothers at MIT. Okay? If I hadn't gone to MIT, if I hadn't met them, if we hadn't been freshman roommates, conceivably my whole life would have been different. Right? That was dumb, blind luck that I happened to be roommates with them. Now, you could go back and say, well, I worked hard in high school, I was a geek, I got into MIT. It's not all luck, right? But there's an amount of luck there, right? If I'd gotten up 10 minutes later, I might end up living somewhere else, right? Because I would have found some other fraternity to pledge. Who knows?
Fascinating. Time for one more, and then go ahead, Alex.
You mentioned the kind of convergence of all these data coming online as being a key catalyst to Clarabridge. looking out right now into the next 10 years, what do you see kind of as the ingredients to create the next generation of data and insight and action?
Yeah, well, so a couple of things I'm kind of excited about. I think that you know, a lot of intelligence in sort of analytics and intelligence that's being used in the world today is truly sort of raw intelligence. So you can think of sort of a supply chain of intelligence, which you've got raw data, you've got distilled data, you've got data formulated into analytics, right, which are more digested and more concise than the actual raw or filtered data. Then you've got, beyond that, you've got recommendations, right, which is you're not even looking at reports to get insights. You've got a machine saying, I'm looking at the reports for you. I'm digesting all the possible options that you should take as a business person. I'm going to recommend with a rank order the things that probably are the best thing to do based on my heuristics. And then you've got, on the final example, you've got predictions, right, which basically say, I'm just going to look at all the possible universe of outcomes and tell you what to do. And I think that we're moving in the realm from, you know, digested to analytics to recommendations and predictions. That's sort of where the world is going. The other thing that I think is happening is that the man-machine interfaces are starting to get much more human, right? So I can imagine, and again, this is sort of the world of science fiction, but it's not far out. I mean, within 5–10 years, you're going to have consultative conversations with your computer, right? You're going to basically say, hey, computer, what should I do today? And they're going to pick up your biometrics on your Apple iWatch, and they're going to see what your appointment schedule is, and they're going to see that you haven't worked out in 3 days, and they're going to say, you need to go downstairs and work out for 20 minutes, okay? And here are the 10 things you should focus on at work today, based on what's most important, right? And companies like Clarabridge are going to be part of that cloud, I think, that helps you do your job better, right? Because we're going to distill that stuff down. And maybe we'll all be plugged into Google or Apple because they're going to be the consumer touch point. But who knows, right? I mean, this is where we're headed, in my mind.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate your coming out this morning, and you know, good luck with everything. Congrats on all the great success. And,
thank you.
Keep it up. So
I appreciate
give it up
it.
for Sid.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Thank you.